I do not trust the Reform Party when it comes to foreign policy. That's it. That's the basis of my video. I just don't trust them. And I've seen yet more information as to more more of a reason for why not to trust them. Turns out that a former advisor of Nigel Farage, a young man by the name of Jack Anderton, has been spouting off on his personal blog as to why, in his view, this country shouldn't have been involved in World War II. Um, this is in the week that we mark VJ Day, the 80th anniversary of the end of that conflict. Um, yeah, so in his view, we shouldn't have been involved in World War II, and that Russia is not our enemy, as he sees it, and we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine because we get nothing in return. This is coming from the 23-year-old former advisor of Nigel Farage, and he gets into other policy areas about Farage's plan to deport criminals to El Salvador and so on. He's also said that we should reclaim colonies like Australia and Canada, reclaim them. It's clearly not real politics he's talking here. To me, this is appalling but not surprising because what we've seen, not just in the Reform Party, but we've seen this across the right, both sides of the Atlantic in recent years. It's this tendency on the hard right to kind of rewrite World War II. And it used to be that those who would serve as apologists for Germany would be on the far right, you know, the likes of the National Front and the BNP and so on. But in recent years, we've been seeing the apologists crawl out from the woodwork to, um, I just find it incredible because you'd think that traditionally conservatives would admire Churchill and they would understand that the Allies had a very just cause in that war, namely fighting fascist Germany and imperialist Japan. It's and fascist Italy. It's just astonishing that we see this mindset, and you see it on both sides of the Atlantic, and not just within the Reform Party. You get the likes of Tucker Carlson and some less famous apologists, um, and the stuff they come out with. You think if they really said that, one of Trump's inner circle, or someone who at least has had his ear, is Laura Loomer, who really should be called Laura Looney. She is a far right extremist. Really, I mean, I'm not just talking about someone who's quite right wing. I mean, she is absolutely so far right. The Marjorie Taylor Greene considers her extreme. That's that shows you where she is. I mean, but it's this thing that I think's developed in the political right in recent years. Now, I want to quantify what I mean by that. I'm not talking about mainstream conservatives. I'm not talking about reasonable centre right people. I'm talking about the hard right. It's this tendency to, in their total contempt for what they see as the woke influence in the West, which I'm no fan of myself, and I've been very critical of that. But they take it to another level. They get into conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement theory. I had someone on my channel the other day claim it's not a conspiracy theory. It is. This idea that there's a genocidal plot to, replace all white people. It's that's the sort of area that the sort of direction that they go down. And I don't even know how to deal with a mindset like that. I don't even know where to start with that way of thinking. Why? Because immigration is a reality in the world. Because people move around as a result of war, as a result of tyranny, as a result of, yes, economic opportunities and disparity. Um, and then, very often the same people get into deep state stuff, QAnon and all the rest of it, all the other manure that they find online. It's troubling because in the past it could just be dismissed as nuts, but these days, you have a president of the United States who has pandered to them. The most powerful man in the world has pandered to this mindset, and that's something that with Trump, it's uncharted territory. It has been pointed out that Trump's unpredictability can be an asset when it comes to dealing with Putin, because it could take Putin off guard. But honestly, that Alaska summit, I think it's fair to say, was a failure. There was no ceasefire. And I don't think there'll be anything positive coming out of Trump's visit to Moscow either. The only thing that can be said is Trump has hardened his rhetoric a little bit. Nevertheless, and I didn't say enough about this the other day, by bringing a war criminal to American soil, by rolling out the red carpet for him, it's normalizing Putin. And it's great for Russian propaganda because it makes Putin look like a normal world leader. It makes him look like he's back on the platform of normality. I think that Starmer was wrong to praise that summit. Starmer is right to support Ukraine and right to be personally supportive of Zelensky, but I think that he tries too hard to please Putin. It's one of my criticisms of Starmer. I know that Lamy and Vance have got this friendship up, and you know, some would say that having a rapport with the Americans is better than having loggerheads at them because it's the world's most powerful country. They would point to the fact that Britain has had slightly less tariffs than other countries, but I don't really agree with the principle of get a bully on your side. The way the Trump administration behaves, it's bombastic. It insults our friends in Canada. I agree with Mark Carney that after that we should have not allow this state visit to go ahead. I don't really see any purpose for it. If Starmer thinks it's going to be a way to reduce not sanctions, a way to reduce tariffs, is that a price worth paying? To kind of pander to Trump to roll out red carpet, treat him like he deserves respect, even though he's in most likelihood a rapist and he is a convicted felon. I have a problem with it, and I think most Britons have a problem with it. But anyway, I digress. Um, I think you could judge a leader by the sort of people that are around him. You could certainly do that in the case of Trump. He's surrounded by extremists. It's the most extreme cabinet the United States has ever had. But the same is true of Farage. Now, this guy, this young advisor, Jack Anderton, stuff he's coming out with, it's lunacy. We're on the wrong side in World War II. What an insult to our veterans. You know, um, I really think someone like him who pretends to be a patriot should be forcefully challenged. And some people might say, well, Nathan, he's young, he's naive. But this is someone who has had an advisor at the age of 23, presumably he was even younger in that position, to be advising a party leader. Clearly, he's got something, so he's not completely stupid. Um, but it reminds me, I remember a teenager some years ago, I had a bit of a run in with him actually because he made a video to me rebuking the fact that I criticized him. Anyway, he was praising the North Korean regime, like really praising it. I initially thought it was parody. I thought he was being sarcastic. He had a North Korean flag in the background. He was deadly serious. I do think some young people like to just rebel. I mean, it's something you get with you. If I was a little bit like that, although I never went so far as to praise tyrants, but you can allow that to an extent. But then when someone, granted, Anderton's young, but he's still in a position where he's advising a party leader, it's troubling. It's troubling. Um, but like I say, this is something we've seen. There's been this revisionism in the right to question if Churchill and Roosevelt were right to get involved in World War II. And they'll get into conspiracy theories about Roosevelt and Jews and all the rest of it. Um, you really do look beneath the surface with the way these people think, and it's quite troubling stuff. It's detached from reality. It's historically inaccurate, and I mean, the idea that we could have just sat out of World War II is astonishingly naive. It's true that Hitler didn't have a hatred for the UK the way he did for the Russians, but there's absolutely no question about it. The idea that we could have just stood by and done nothing, I think it's astonishing that anyone would think that. And also, for these people to call themselves patriots, the Third Reich killed 67,000 British civilians in the Blitz and other air raids. So Jack Anderton, you are an ignorant little fool. You are insulting the country that you claim to be patriotic about. You're not a patriot, you're an idiot. Or perhaps worse, you're not an idiot, you know full well what you're talking about, but you are actually an extremist. Um, Now, if it was just one person, you could dismiss it. Okay, it's every party has its odd extremists, but in the case of reform, this isn't unique. Julian Malland, the reform candidate for Salisbury last year, claimed that he spoke to Putin for 10 minutes and found him to be a good man. But then he quantified that he done wicked things and he didn't agree with what he done in Ukraine and Salisbury. And in a Christian sense, he's not good. But Malins actually said he spoke to Putin and found him to be a good man and a good leader for Russia. This where was he planning to stand? In the very city that Russia attacked. Now he didn't win, but the fact that he could actually say that and consider himself to be a serious candidate is astonishing. Farage said he didn't agree with those comments, but um, he wouldn't reprimand them formally. Farage himself has infamously said that he admired Putin, and in his case, he put this big caveat. I don't like him personally, and he condemned the invasion of Ukraine, and he claimed he supports sanctions against Russia. But the thing with Farage is, he was very quick to deny that he was a Putin apologist. Yet simultaneously, he was repeating Russian propaganda about NATO expansion being the cause of the war in Ukraine. Well, I would point out that actually the reason NATO has expanded is because of Russian aggression. It's the other way around. Russia isn't aggressive because of NATO. NATO has expanded because of Russian aggression. At one point, I understand there was even amusing that Russia could join NATO. I mean, that's like on a what's the opening of Star Wars on a planet far, far away. Well, yeah, the idea of Russia being in NATO is like science fiction right now. But I do recall the Kursk disaster when the Russian submarine was sinking in I believe it was the Barents Sea in the year 2000. Britain and Norway actually offered Putin assistance. Now, you could argue that because of it was just after the Cold War, maybe, well, 8 years after, 9 years after, and maybe for state security or something, Putin would turn it down for that reason. But Putin could have politely said, "Thank you for your assistance," but no, he just flat refused. And as a result, dozens of sailors drowned, Russian sailors. Um, because Putin turned down the offer of British and Norwegian assistance. The narrative that the right like to spin that Russia is acting because it felt humiliated, it was, not respected by the West. That's one that is always brought up. The fact of the matter is, Russia was in the G8 for years. The problem with the West actually has been for too long. Western prime ministers and presidents have pandered to Putin and expected that he would change somehow. Russian dissidents like Gary Kasparov have really denounced this as a policy. They've said that, the signs should be clear all along. Putin is a thug. He's a criminal. He's a gangster. He cannot be trusted. Um, but the point is that Russia had its chance. Russia was treated as an equal. So those who want to bring about this narrative that Russia wasn't respected, it's fiction. It's a lie. And as for what Putin was saying in Alaska, it was like mockingly insulting his victims, our other nation. A Ukrainian friend of mine, she posted a video which showed like juxtaposing Putin talking in Alaska, whilst Ukrainians were literally dying. On that very day, 7 Ukrainian civilians died and more were injured in Russian strikes on the very day that that happened. Um, the problem with that Alaska summit, aside from being a failure, is it gave a platform to Putin. I think the fact that it wasn't on American soil was a big mistake. I think it should have been again in a third party. Saudi Arabia, the optics weren't the same, but to have Putin on American soil, I think it's an insult to the American people. Obviously, those in MAGA don't care because they're ignorant about Russia and Ukraine. But to decent Americans, it's an insult, um, and it's a very big insult to Ukrainians. It's true that Trump has finally toughened his rhetoric a little bit with Putin, but contrast the way they treated Putin compared to Zelensky. With Zelensky, they cornered him, they gaslit him, they insulted him. With Putin, they roll out the red carpet. Putin's plane was apparently slightly short of the point, and so American soldiers had to actually basically show subservience. They had to get down on their knees and roll out the red carpet. That's the optics are very, very bad, and that's on Trump's watch. You can imagine if a left wing Democrat president done this, they would never hear the end of it. If this had come from even someone like Obama or Biden, Republicans would be, you would never hear the end of it. But because it's Trump, he gets away with it. I actually think even comparing this to Chamberlain is misplaced because when Chamberlain signed the Munich Agreement, World War II hadn't happened. In this case, the invasion of Ukraine's already happened. We've seen Russian aggression, and yet Trump is still doing this. I suppose Trump supporters would say, well, what's wrong with trying to get peace? My response to that would be Ukrainians, above all people, want peace. You ask any Ukrainian, of course they want peace. But is it a true peace if their country is being sold? You know, Zelensky was right to say any agreement without Ukrainian involvement is invalid. And for me, what is, Putin's just buying more time here because his demands are wholly unrealistic. He wants Ukraine to be totally demilitarized. He wants complete control of Ukraine and he wants sanctions lifted. Of those three, sanctions being lifted might be the most realistic, but that will only happen when Russia withdraws from Ukraine. And in a way, Putin's got himself into a hole because if he withdraws from Ukraine, he looks weak to Russian nationalists. Then they could target him. So Putin has actually got himself in a mess. I have no sympathy, but that may be the internal politics going on within Russia. Um, but back to reform, when reform people are called out for this, for their attitude to Russia and Ukraine, and one other reform person, I forget who it was off the top of my head, but he described this as a distant Slavic war. These people forget that it isn't just about Ukraine. Russian nationals threaten Western Europe every day with nuclear warfare. Um, Russia attacked Salisbury. Russia poisoned Alexander Litvinenko on British soil. They seem to conveniently forget this. We have Russia violating our airspace on a regular basis. You have the Navy and the RAF tailing Russian personnel on our radar. I just think the security services have long warned about Russia along with China. I just think for anyone to claim to be a patriot yet parrot Russian propaganda is unforgivable. Um, I try to avoid using the word treason because it's a loaded word, but honestly, I think if you're in politics or the armed forces or anything to do with any sort of secure institution in this country and you are parroting Russian propaganda, it's hard to see it any other way. I really believe that. I think, like I say, when reform people are called out for this stuff, they always say it's taken out of context or they don't really support Putin, they condemn what he's done, but there's always these groveling caveats after what they have said. Um, and I think that my concern is if they got into power, what would they do? I honestly think they would sooner roll out the red carpet for Putin, Trump style, than Macron or Merz. And that I find very telling. So yeah, I do not trust reform on foreign policy. Um, the only thing Farage has got right in this area, he has taken a hard line with China and expressed the fact that we need to be careful about the, you know, espionage threat from China. He is right about that. But when it comes to Russia, I do not trust reform. I don't trust Farage. I also don't trust his attitude to Trump. He's basically sycophantic to Trump. We know he's good friends, and that's it may be a point of strength. And right now, Starmer has a good working relationship with Trump. David Lammy has struck up an unexpected friendship with Vance. But I think that we need to work with America. I don't like this policy of pandering to Trump, and I think there's far too much of that going on. I don't really see any reason for that state visit to go ahead at this point. I'm not saying there should never be a state visit, but why in the first year of Trump's second term? It just looks like pandering. Um, Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I just don't trust reform on foreign policy. Now, I've said that don't trust, but I find it refreshing that reform's talking about being the hardest party ever on crime. Well, they have to do that across the board, and a lot of people on the right now, Robert Jenrick and the Tories is another example. They're blaming migrants for absolutely everything. The man who drove his car into a crowd in Liverpool, injuring dozens of people. Thank God there were no fatalities, but there were serious injuries, including children, was a white British guy. the right now are implying that every single migrant, every single male migrant is a rapist. It's dangerous rhetoric. It's dehumanizing, and I do have a problem with it. Today, literally today, I witnessed two Iranians get baptized in my local church. Migrants. Um, so these are examples of people who are fleeing persecution. It's sincere. This idea that they're all coming over for economic benefits is not accurate. And I'm not naive. There are definitely migrants who abuse the system, who commit crime here. You know, they should be thrown out. There are some who have hostile ideologies in contrast with the West. I'm not naive about this stuff. I'm not. But I have a problem with the hypocrisy of saying, you know, we're protesting against migrants to protect women and girls, but they turn a blind eye to yobs who have domestic violence records. Or, for example, the shoplifting epidemic. Where's the outrage about that? You know, where's the protest about that? Anyway, I'll wrap this up. I don't trust reform on foreign policy until someone can give me a very convincing reason why I should.